Imagine a plague that appeared once in human history and then vanished completely, leaving behind traces in ancient texts, skeletal remains, and the genetic code of our ancestors, yet never returning to haunt humanity again. A disease so singular, so profound in its biological and social impact, that it challenges our understanding of epidemics, evolution, and the delicate balance between humans and pathogens. This is not a story of repeated outbreaks, nor of pandemics like the Black Death or the 1918 influenza. This is a rare event, a biological enigma that forces us to reconsider what we know about disease and survival, and the fragile architecture of human society. Why did it appear once, and why did it never return? What does this fleeting yet catastrophic phenomenon tell us about human resilience and hidden mechanisms of immunity, and the very structure of collective behavior under extreme stress? In exploring this anomaly, we will journey through history, the wiring of the human brain, the invisible currents of social networks, and the subtle signals of evolutionary biology. We will encounter paradoxes where vulnerability becomes strength, and where absence speaks as loudly as presence. Our story begins in the intersection of history, science, and philosophy, where a single historical signal illuminates the intricate relationship between humans, their environment, and pathogens. The significance of this topic lies not merely in curiosity about a rare disease, but in what it reveals about adaptation. The human brain and society are wired to respond to threats in ways that maximize survival, sometimes in counterintuitive forms, just as neurons fire in patterns that prioritize efficiency and redundancy. Communities respond to disease through networks of perception, social cues, and collective action. A plague that disappears after one outbreak may seem like an anomaly, but it also serves as a lens through which we can examine the principles governing human adaptation, epidemiological thresholds, and psychological architecture of fear and cooperation. Understanding this historical event is not about sensationalism. It is about appreciating the hidden logic of life under stress and the subtle, often invisible forces that shape human history. In the same way that a sudden signal in a neuron network can propagate change across an entire brain, a rare epidemic can send shockwaves through societies, altering behavior, culture, and even genetic selection. Consider the case of Yersinia pestis, the bacterium responsible for the infamous Black Death, which periodically ravaged Europe for centuries. Now, imagine a pathogen of equal lethality but without the repetition. One that emerges, strikes with devastating efficiency, and then disappears from the historical and biological record. Archaeogenetic studies have revealed evidence of such pathogens in ancient skeletal remains. Lesions, DNA fragments, and isotopic anomalies that indicate high mortality events. However, unlike recurring epidemics, the trail ends abruptly. This raises profound questions about immunity, environmental constraints, and the evolutionary pressures that allow a pathogen to flourish only briefly. It is tempting to think of diseases as endless cycles, but a single, vanishing plague forces us to consider limits, thresholds, and systemic checks that operate at scales we rarely perceive, just as our brains maintain homeostasis. Through inhibitory feedback and neural pruning, ecosystems and human networks impose invisible boundaries that can halt even the most lethal biological forces. From a psychological perspective, witnessing such a plague would have profound effects on collective cognition. Human perception of risk is non-linear. Rare catastrophic events generate intense fear, yet they are often rationalized or mythologized, because the mind struggles to integrate information about extremely low probability occurrences. Early communities likely experienced a combination of terror, superstition, and adaptive behavior. Fear, while debilitating at an individual level, often catalyzes collective action, reinforcing social norms and strengthening survival strategies. In modern neuroscience terms, the amygdala reacts to threat signals, triggering fight or flight responses, while higher cortical areas attempt to contextualize and strategize. In a historical context, these neural and psychological mechanisms would have shaped communal responses, influencing settlement patterns, sanitation practices, and intergroup interactions. In this sense, a vanished plague is not simply a medical mystery. It is a window into the emergent intelligence of societies under duress, where perception, emotion, and behavior form a dynamic network capable of constraining even the deadliest biological signal. From an evolutionary standpoint, A single appearance plague also offers insights into selection pressures. Epidemics act as filters, accelerating adaptation by removing susceptible individuals and allowing more resistant genotypes to persist. Yet, when a pathogen disappears after one outbreak, the selective landscape changes abruptly. Genetic adaptations may persist in latent form, altering immunity profiles for generations, even without further exposure. This interplay between episodic stressors and latent resilience mirrors neural plasticity. The brain strengthens certain synaptic pathways in response to a single intense stimulus, producing lasting change, even after the stimulus is gone. Similarly, a society or population that survives a singular epidemic carries forward both genetic and cultural imprints of that event. Practices such as social distancing, ritual cleansing, and quarantine could emerge organically, encoded in custom and collective memory long after the pathogen itself has vanished. History, in this sense, acts as a repository of experiential data where rare events leave outsized marks on the architecture of human behavior. The metaphor of society as an energy network is particularly useful here. Just as electrical networks can experience transient surges that test system integrity without causing permanent collapse, societies face acute biological shocks that reveal both vulnerability and resilience. During a one-time epidemic, connections between individuals, trade routes, kinship networks, and communal gatherings become channels for both risk and adaptation. Information about illness, death, and protective practices propagates through these networks, influencing behavior at both micro and macro scales. This creates a feedback loop. As social structures respond to the initial outbreak, the pathogen's effective reproductive number may fall below the threshold necessary for sustained transmission. The plague disappears not through divine intervention or mere luck, but as a consequence of systemic intelligence embedded in human behavior. In other words, what appears as a singular historical anomaly is in fact the outcome of complex adaptive dynamics between biology, psychology, and society. Yet there is another layer to consider: the role of perception and memory. Human societies construct narratives to make sense of extreme events, blending empirical observation with myth and moral interpretation. A vanished plague becomes a story, a cautionary tale, a historical signal interpreted differently across generations. Memory acts as a secondary adaptive system, encoding lessons about risk, cooperation, and survival. The neurological analogy is compelling. Episodic memory consolidates singular experiences for future reference. Societies consolidate rare catastrophes into collective memory, influencing decision-making and cultural norms. The absence of recurrence does not imply insignificance. The single occurrence leaves a latent influence. This influence continues to shape behavior long after the pathogen is gone. We see this in ancient texts describing sudden plagues in cryptic terms, in burial practices that shift abruptly in response to mortality events, and in the genetic traces of immunity that endure invisibly within populations. The twist in this story is subtle but profound. Apparent weakness is a manifestation of long-term survival mechanisms. By succumbing to an epidemic, societies may trigger adaptive responses that reduce future vulnerability. Individual suffering generates collective insight. Neural and social networks rely on feedback and error correction. Stress responses are not merely defensive but informational, guiding survival and future strategies. What seems like fragility is an expression of systemic intelligence. A vanished plague is both a threat and a teacher, an event that cannot repeat. It has already instilled the conditions necessary to prevent recurrence. It is a paradox where absence itself is a form of protection. Encoded in the adaptive architecture of human biology and society, exploring the interplay between environment and pathogen sheds further light. The ecological context, climate, population density, biodiversity, creates constraints that can suppress pathogen persistence. A disease that emerges under very specific conditions may find no hospitable niche once those conditions change. This is reminiscent of the brain's sensitivity to context. A neural response may not recur under different conditions. Similarly, a historical plague may vanish because the environmental and social input signals no longer exist. This emphasizes that the disappearance of a pathogen is not necessarily miraculous, but the result of an intricate balance. We can also reflect on philosophical implications. A one-time plague challenges linear notions of causality and recurrence. History is often studied as a sequence of events, yet some phenomena resist simple repetition. The vanishing plague is a reminder that contingency, randomness, and emergent complexity shape our world. It raises questions about human agency. How much of survival is the result of conscious action? And how much emerges from the invisible patterns of networks, biology, and psychology? In this light, the vanished plague is not only a biological and historical phenomenon, but also a meditation on the limits of knowledge, the interplay of chance and necessity, and the subtle architecture of resilience. In reflecting upon these dynamics, we see multiple layers of adaptation intertwined. The pathogen itself is a signal, the outbreak a perturbation, and human response an intricate set of feedback loops. Psychology, neurology, sociology, and epidemiology converge to create an emergent system capable of learning from singular events. Memory, ritual, genetic selection, and social norms act as repositories of experience, encoding lessons that prevent recurrence. The fact that this plague appears only once is not a failure of biology or society, but an illustration of an extraordinary adaptive intelligence. It demonstrates that fragility can coexist with resilience, that vulnerability can catalyze strength, and that absence can be as meaningful as presence. The implications for modern understanding are profound. In an age where global pandemics are studied extensively, the notion of a one-time epidemic challenges assumptions about predictability and control. It urges us to consider the limits of surveillance, the importance of historical context, and the subtle interplay of environmental, biological, and social factors that govern disease dynamics. Just as neuroscientists study rare phenomena to understand general principles of brain function, historians and epidemiologists can study vanished plagues to reveal fundamental truths about adaptation, perception, and collective intelligence. These events, though fleeting, carry lessons that extend far beyond their boundaries. As we contemplate this vanished plague, we are invited to reflect on broader philosophical questions. How do we, as a species, respond to extreme, low-probability events? What does it mean for a society to learn from catastrophe, even when the threat itself is gone? How do memory, narrative, and culture encode adaptive wisdom that is invisible yet profoundly consequential? The interplay of biology, psychology, and history suggests that human survival is rarely about confronting every threat directly. Sometimes it is about the subtle, indirect shaping of networks, behaviors, and institutions that prevent recurrence. Vulnerability, paradoxically, becomes a vector of resilience, and absence becomes a powerful signal of systemic intelligence. In conclusion, the story of the plague that appeared once and never again offers a remarkable perspective on human adaptation, societal intelligence, and the interplay of biological and environmental factors. It illustrates that rare events can leave enduring imprints on both genetic and cultural landscapes, that collective behavior can prevent recurrence through emergent feedback loops, and that what appears as fragility is often a sophisticated mechanism of resilience. By examining this anomaly through the lenses of neuroscience, psychology, history, and epidemiology, we gain a deeper understanding of the dynamic interplay between threat and adaptation, signal and response, presence and absence. We learn that human societies, like neural networks, are capable of extraordinary learning and self-regulation, often in ways that elude immediate perception. The vanished plague challenges assumptions, provokes reflection, and ultimately inspires awe at the hidden intelligence embedded in human history. So the next time you consider a threat or a rare event, ask yourself, what lessons might be encoded in its fleeting appearance? How does the absence of recurrence itself speak volumes about the systems that sustain life and society? How might the singular events of history shape the patterns of our collective future in ways we cannot yet see? Reflect on these questions, explore the intersections of science and history, and consider how even the rarest signals in human experience contribute to the architecture of resilience. If this journey through history, biology, and philosophy sparked curiosity or altered your perspective even slightly, leave a comment below with your thoughts. Give this video a like and subscribe to Past Lens for more explorations into the hidden narratives of our past that illuminate the patterns of humanity, one story at a time.